I could have bought this tea on Amazon and had it delivered overnight. However, I spent a whole Saturday morning picking leaves from my red raspberry plants and harvesting some mint, drying it myself and turning it into my own tea. And today I'm going to show you how and why I did, as well as I did a taste test live. So a couple years ago, we planted some red raspberry bushes. We had about 4, and we planted them for the raspberries themselves, especially with a young toddler. It was so cute. She would go up and she'd want to pick the red raspberries and eat them. She devoured those 4 plants. So we ended up planting 20 more, or should I say my husband ended up planting 20 more. But regardless, we have a ton of red raspberry plants now. And when I was watching a video from More Than Farmers, she actually talked about how she harvests her red raspberry leaves early in the spring, as well as a few other plants, and makes her own teas. So I decided I'm going to give it a try. I'm more of a coffee drinker. However, during my pregnancy, I drank red raspberry leaf tea in the 3rd trimester, as many pregnant women do. But there was one tea that I actually really liked, and it was a brand called Earth Mama, and it was Earth Mama's 3rd trimester tea. It was really good because it was a mint red raspberry leaf tea, and I loved the mint flavor. And as I was thinking, I have a whole 4x4 raised bed of mint. So I figure, why not mix the red raspberry leaf tea and the mint tea leaves together and make my own blend. Before I had my kids, I used to really like the Bigelow Plantation mint tea. It was one of my favorites growing up. It was a black tea mixed with mint, and it was so good. However, the red raspberry leaf tea is an herbal tea, so there's no caffeine, which is really nice. So in early June, I meant to do it sooner, but life with 2 toddlers, full-time jobs, it just didn't happen. So early in June, I went down, and red raspberry leaf bushes can kind of spread. So we always cut down some of the spreading canes. So instead of just cutting them down to get rid of them, I decided to go ahead and remove those and pick the leaves off of those to put in the dehydrator. I stripped the leaves by hand, placing them in my dehydrator on the trays. This is not a fancy dehydrator. It is a dehydrator that my husband had from before we even met. So I loaded it up and I turned it on its lowest setting at 95 degrees, which is specifically for herbs. Now, since I loaded up the dehydrator with red raspberry leaves, I didn't actually have room for mint leaves, so I tried bundling them and hanging them up on a hanger to dry. However, I will say that was taking a really long time. So when my red raspberry leaf teas were fully dried, I put them in a glass mason jar and I loaded up the dehydrator with those mint leaves that were previously hanging. One thing I would note, it said that it would take them about 8 hours to fully dry. I let them go longer. I let them go overnight. Now, the mint leaves took much longer to dry than I thought. I thought it would be similar to the red raspberry leaves, but I actually turned it up to about 105 degrees to help speed it up. From everything that I read, that wouldn't necessarily deteriorate any of the oils in it. So bumped up a little higher, let it go longer to really get those leaves really nice and dry. So the blend that I was going to try is 1.5 to 1 ratio of red raspberry leaf tea to spearmint tea. So why would I even do this? Well, I can rattle off a whole list of benefits from knowing that it was grown organically with no pesticides or herbicides. Obviously, it's free. It just took my time. But also the larger environmental impact. There's no packaging, there's no transportation, manufacturing, energy use besides my little dehydrator. And I can ensure that it was really harvested when it was the most fresh and high quality. And while all of those things are true, it's not actually why it feels different. There's this deeper thing that's kind of hard to name, but it's that same feeling that you get when you have a fresh dinner plate and you look down and you realize that over 60% of it is stuff that you grew and harvested from your garden. Last year, we cooked dinner and we had some steak on the grill, and it had potatoes that we had dug up from our garden. It had fresh zucchini, onions, all from our garden. And yes, I think it tastes slightly better, but the experience of eating it is completely different. There's this sense of pride and confidence in that moment that you know that you grew it and your work fed and nourished your family with really healthy food. I'm not gonna lie, it is work. However, there is something about being in the garden, connecting to what you're growing, from the soil up through the leaves that you're harvesting and using. There's just a sense of connection that I felt like I was missing, and it just makes you feel good. This tea isn't just a drink. It fits into something that I've been thinking a lot about on how I want to give gifts this year. I don't want to go through the experience of scrolling Amazon trying to find stuff that you think your family member may want, but they really kind of already buy everything that they want. So instead, I really want to try giving gifts that were made with intention over the course of the whole year. Maybe a tea that I grew and dried and blended myself, some raspberry jam from the same bushes, a scone biscuit mix that I made myself, things that took thought and care and time and that won't become clutter. That's what I want to give people that I love. And this morning's effort of making my own tea is just the start of that. All right, now it's time for the taste test. I have here 5 different cups of different teas. I have a just straight red raspberry tea that I bought. It is a loose leaf to compare that with the red raspberry leaf that I harvested and dried. I have my favorite tea that kind of inspired this, which was third trimester tea. It has red raspberry leaf, mint, and so it has this very minty flavor that I really like. But it also does have a few extra things in it too that won't be in my version. And then we have a cup that has the red raspberry leaf and the spearmint leaves in a ratio of 1.5 to 1. So fingers crossed that that is as good as this tea that I like so much. And then we have at the very end a non-herbal tea. It's actually the Bigelow Plantation Mint that I grew up drinking. So it was reading to perfectly mint, sorry. But it is delicious. And so we're just going to compare because red raspberry leaf, to me, this kind of tastes like a black tea, but non-caffeinated. So we'll see how these compare to the plantation mint. All right, so first up, I'm just going to try the store-bought loose leaf red raspberry tea. It's really good. It's kind of got a mild black tea taste. Black tea can be very strong, but this one's definitely more mild. It's delicious. Now, the interesting thing that I have seen here, it's got me really curious. Before I test my red raspberry leaf, the color on this one is so different. This one is kind of more of a brown, light brown color, almost kind of more like a warm reddish undertone, whereas my brewed tea is very light, almost like a greenish yellowy color. So that kind of really makes me curious. I actually had to Google and see why that might be. And apparently, just depending on the age, how finely chopped up the tea is, how long they've sat out to dry, sometimes the leaves can actually get a dark brown color, which would make the tea a little bit more brown. It was saying that a light yellow greenish tea is actually what it's supposed to be. So we'll see if the taste is really different from this one. It's good. It's really mild. I would say, like the store-bought one a little bit better. It kind of does have a little bit of that green taste to it, but it's actually really pretty good. So I would definitely drink this. I am curious where the mint version of this is going to be, because this is good, but I feel like it needs a little bit more of a punch to it. So now I'm going to try the the raspberry herbal mint tea, this third trimester tea. It's got a blend. It's got other things like chamomile, stinging nettle, and all of that in here, which my version will not have. Yeah, that's good. This one just has that little bit of mintiness that just really adds a lot to the flavor of the tea. All right, now for the true test. This is what I've been wanting to make. So let's see what this one tastes like. Again, it has more of that light color, whereas this one is very clearly brown. Not as deep as the black tea, but definitely darker than this homemade version. That's good. I think the mint really does add a lot to the red raspberry leaf tea. It's much more mild of a taste. So I think the mint is really needed to give it more flavor. I actually really like that. I would drink that. And lastly, I don't expect any of them to taste like this, but I had to make the plantation mint just to try. Okay, well, that's interesting. I actually don't like that one as much as I like these others. I did not expect that to be the case. I will say, as I drink this one here that was my homemade tea blend, the taste is really good, but when I go to take a sip and I'm smelling it, it basically smells like the herbs themselves. So it definitely has that like fresh mint smell that kind of smells a little bit green too. Yeah, that's good. All right, so I just took another sip of this one. Honestly, I really don't have a preference between the two. So I would say that's pretty much a win in my book, because obviously this is store-bought, has a lot of packaging and all of that, whereas this took a Saturday morning and of course some drying time to basically make a whole bunch of tea. This obviously took my time, whereas like this one was, I think, like $13 for this little pack. So honestly, I'm pretty happy with the experiment. I want to be real about something. At the end of the workday, with back-to-back meetings, constant context switching, being pinged while in other meetings already, and talking to 3 different people while you're trying to listen into a meeting in case you need to say something. At the end of that workday, I feel like the life is sucked out of me. I am drained mentally, not physically, because I've been sitting on my butt all day in a little gray cubicle under fluorescent lighting. But I told my husband walking out one day, and now I will always use this metaphor, but I feel like a prune, like the juice is just sucked out of me. And then you come home and you're just so fried mentally, but you still want to be there for your kids that you just picked up from daycare, and you have all evening with them, but you're so mentally exhausted. Now contrast that with this morning in the garden, or working in the garden all day, layering compost, planting plants, pulling weeds. That is hard work, especially when it gets hot outside, and I'm not one that likes heat. But at the end of that day, yes, I can feel tired. My feet can ache, perhaps even my back, but mostly my feet. I feel so good. Yes, I'm physically tired, but mentally, I feel alive. I'm not stressed. I'm not mentally drained. I don't just want to sit on the couch and scroll and turn my brain off because it's already done too much. I feel accomplished, inspired, and I think that's the point of this whole slow living, do it yourself, use your hands, getting outside in the sun, putting your hands in actual dirt. That connection with nature, the earth, the food that you eat, the way your nervous system handles that versus sitting in an office, constantly needed for some emergency, some fire that when you step back and you think about it, it's not life or death, it's not an emergency, but we make everything an emergency and a fire. And it's just so bad for our bodies. Whereas gardening, farming, all of that, hard work, but so rewarding, and actually helps our body with being physically active and calming our nervous system. And that's why I'm working towards something different. Now, I'm not saying you have to garden. I have spent 4 years building up my garden, but doing something similar, making something with your hands, whether that is making your own quilt or making bread. It's just about that same feeling of accomplishment, of this taking the longer way to make something yourself and finding peace in those moments as you do so. But if you want to get started with a little bit of your own tea garden, gardening, even if you have no space, if you have a patio or balcony, a pot of mint out on the table, that thing grows crazy. So if you pick up some spearmint, it's one of the easiest little experiments that you can run. The investment is very little and the return is just hard to quantify. And the tea might actually be good.